This is every way to make ugly blocks pretty in Minecraft. And hey, YouTube tells me that no one's ever subscribed to the channel with all 5 of the fingers on their hand at once. So if you want to prove it's possible, smush your fingers together and push that subscribe button down below. It's free and it helps out a ton. If you ask someone their favorite color, brown's rarely gonna come up, which is probably why blocks like granite and podzol are considered to be a pretty ugly block. But as Jaredcraft shows off, if you use that to your advantage, you can get some really cool looking stuff. And I do think using this for landscaping actually goes a long way, since here we get a lot more subtle tones to use than just having regular dirt. Dirt and coarse dirt by themselves, not exactly pretty, but using it as the landscape for a wasteland like this, you get something pretty special. It's distinct enough from the mesa biome, but it's also not one note. I like it. And as Jaredcraft also shows off here, there's finally a use for magenta terracotta inside of your builds, since when you look at it just by itself, yeah, we can't sugarcoat it, it just looks bad. Directional textures can already be pretty tough to build with, but having a literal arrow, that's saying too much. But when you cover it up with purple slabs like this, then you get a really pretty design peeking out of the back. And that's why we showed off something similar in our dream house video. It can look really pretty. Not bad for one of the ugliest blocks out there. A dirt house is clowned on for being one of the ugliest things that you can build in Minecraft. I mean, if you need it for shelter, that's something, but it's probably not going to be something that you want to live in full time. However, with what Smallish Beans built here, it really is possible to make something prettier here. I mean, for one, there's not just one type of dirt. And the same way that we were using other blocks mixed in to get ourselves that wasteland before, we could use some of that to our advantage here if we wanted to add in more variation. But then, if you just use the right accent colors and actually give this a proper shape, from far away, it's hard to tell if this is dirt. It looks more like a clay or some other block that you're building out of. And the advent of mud blocks definitely shows that we can use those as well to get some pretty sweet looking designs. I mean, this was made 5 years ago in the original video, so there's a lot more brown bricks in Minecraft to use since then. Dripstone spikes are pretty cool, but the actual dripstone block, it's not a looker. It's a very intense, harsh texture, but there are some colors we can actually mix pretty well together. For example, if you're not a fan of the way that weathered copper actually looks, then mixing the two together, you get something that actually starts to complement. Now, is everyone gonna find this pretty? No. The comments on the original post prove as much. But is it a lot better than what we started from? Absolutely. And I think that's a good start, especially because now we can show it off to other builders like you, and I know you'll go do something special with it. Well, there's definitely some pretty variations of basalt. The regular block by itself leaves something to be desired. I mean, for one, it reminds you of the basalt deltas, and those are not a fun biome to be in by any means. But as this user shows off, by mixing together the directionality of the block, we can actually get some quite pretty results to mix into your paths. Or if you want to take it another step, if you look closely, you can see that this actually matches the texture of an oak log pretty well. Place 2 of these vertically with some cobblestone for the leaves, and you basically got a charred tree. That looks pretty cool in the nether if you ask me. And it's not going to burn down to any ghasts. I actually think that granite could do better for itself than its middle child status suggests. And if you look at examples where it's mixed in with spruce logs and wood, the reddish hues of the granite actually make it work really nice as a complementary stone block. And so if you use it lower down in your builds and use it as a foundation, I think you get something really quality here. And what's even more impressive is that this isn't the polished version of the block at all. It's just regular granite. Still looks great. I think that's worth some props. Here, instead of just taking one ugly block and making it pretty, this user basically did what's the equivalent of making a stew. Take all the cheaper cuts of meat, mix it together, and then, as a sum of its parts, you get something a lot more special. And so, while stripped jungle log and dripstone and raw iron might not look great by themselves, added into a palette like this, it really sticks out. And the same can be said for all the other blocks that they have in the 4 different quadrants here. I mean, just take any of these for inspiration, and you could have something pretty special for your next build. Though, with the amount of raw ore blocks that they're using here, you're also gonna have something pretty expensive. Look out for that while you're doing this. You know those random water pits and puddles that tend to generate inside of your plains biome? Yeah, when you zoom out, they're not exactly the prettiest. Looks more like zits on a face. So to clean you up and look better before prom night, the user Spaceboy Art has the right idea of instead flattening those out and making one giant lake to instead hold all of the water. And I have to agree with what they said in the comments here. The idea of the plains is that it's supposed to be a place for all your big projects. So having these little hurdles and obstacles can really be a pain. And so instead, moving it all into one centralized area for a lake, now you've got a water feature to build around, and the rest of the space to actually use. Showing what's ugly in small doses actually looks quite nice if you mix it all together. Shroomlights are a really unique texture, and while they fit within the nether, when you take them over to the overworld, they're usually gonna look out of place. Or they would, unless we did this build hack. Since by placing a few of these down with another nether block, the weeping vines on top, then it'll stick out as a convincing pineapple patch within your build. Granted, that's a lot of pineapple, but I like pineapple. I'm not gonna judge. And hey, it's also gonna stop any mobs from spawning nearby, giving you both a build hack and a nice ambient lighting solution. I'll take both of those. Wither skeleton skulls are usually just good for one thing, spawning the wither. But if you manage to have good luck with looting, you could actually use these for a nice build hack if you wanted to. See, by angling these just right, we can follow this user's lead and have them be cannonballs inside of your pirate ship. And I think that looks quite nice. A little destructive maybe, especially if someone happens to break them and bring along some soul soil. But as long as you got the right pirate ship to be storing all these, and you keep your crew in line, I think these will work pretty well in your next 7 seas. Using Endstone in a build is already a bold move. I mean, let's face it, there's some things that are better left in the end. But this user shows us that there's actually a pretty good reason for Mojang added in the brick versions of these blocks, and that by using it together with green glazed terracotta, you can get a really nice green looking building for your skyline. Now, admittedly, it is going to take a while if you want to get all these blocks in survival. I don't know many people who like to spend their time mining for Endstone, but when the results can look like this, I'd reconsider if I had the stuff on hand, which is way more than I was doing otherwise. Really, I would have just thrown this off the cliff into the void, so I think this is a better fit for it. Now, when we talk about making a dirt house in Minecraft, you're usually picturing your first night, something that's just meant to get you by so that you don't die to the creepers and zombies outside. But as the years have gone by and Mojang's added new dirt blocks into updates, we actually see that it could be useful to use inside of your roof. And now, by using something like moss and rooted dirt inside of your roof, we get a kind of overgrown look to your build. And considering that this can happen with moss to actual rooftops in the real world, I mean, then it's just realistic. And mixing it together with deep slate in this house example is really nice. The greens of the moss really break up the kind of grays that we got going on here. Just don't expect it to give you much blast protection. I mean, after all, it is a roof made out of dirt. What did you expect? Now, sometimes the best way to use a dirty looking block is to make that the whole point. And as the user patches shows us over here on Reddit, by using invisible item frames or armor stands to put these items on top of the ground, then we can use an armor stand and a fence like this to make ourselves a vacuum cleaner, and now it tells a story. We gotta go clean up the mess inside of your base. And honestly, I like to think about this as a fun bit of world building for all the items that we throw out onto the floor to despawn in 5 minutes. If they didn't despawn, we'd have a lot of things like this. Who knows, maybe there's some invisible vacuum cleaner going through and cleaning up our mess. If so, I appreciate it, but don't expect to get paid for the cleaning. In most cases, dried kelp seems like a pretty useless food source. But while they might seem like garbage, they're actually pretty effective as trash. Let me explain. By crafting a chunk of these into some dried kelp blocks, we get the perfect texture for industrial trash bags, letting us add some new life into your city's alleyway. Thanks to the works of C418, Minecraft has plenty of music to listen to. And then, through note blocks, we can add in a fair bit of our own tunes as well. But while those instruments are well and good to listen to, what if we want something a bit more visual? Well, that's where the dragon heads come in. But of course, not like this. But rather, if we follow along how others have done, we can push these dragon-headed armor stands inside of other blocks, giving us a pretty convincing piano to use in our worlds. We might have built this out of mud, but these aren't mud blocks. Rather, by using brown mushroom blocks like this, we can mix it in as something of a smooth mud texture. And honestly, seeing this proof of concept, I'm amazed that smooth mud wasn't added in with the rest of the textures, because seeing this, it really does look nice. Glow lichen is a neat addition to the Caves and Cliffs update, but most of its purpose is served for lighting up those caves, and ultimately it doesn't do much up here on the surface. But this fixes that. As you'll notice, when you put this on coarse dirt, it gives a valuable transitionary block between dirt and stone, giving us builders another tool for our arsenal. Since hanging roots can be waterlogged, if we combine pink glass with waterlogged hanging roots, we can place these in our ocean to make our very own jellyfish. And when viewed from the right angles, the direction of the roots even makes it look as if the jellyfish is swimming, which I think is just adorable. Bookshelves seem like a nice decoration, but they can very quickly get repetitive, and oftentimes the texture is just reserved for your level 30 enchantment room. But this might be a way to break up that sameness. Apparently, the loom texture when placed side by side makes for a pretty convincing empty bookshelf block. So while it's a far cry from the variated textures we see in something like Vanilla Tweaks, I do think it's a step in the right direction. While dead coral fans can be used for TNT duplication systems, dead coral blocks are a different story, and usually these are less desirable than their living counterparts. But while they might look less vibrant, their texture does still lend well to certain color palettes. And from there, we can make these pretty useful when mixed into a gravel path like so. Cobwebs are annoying, but here they're essential, because with just a trapdoor and a backboard, we have all we need to make ourselves a simple basketball hoop. And if you want, you can even pick up a piece of orange concrete and throw it through, and it'll fall right through the cobweb. Nothing but net. For the building community, the addition of candles in the Caves and Cliffs update was a big deal. And while they're useful as a light source, their unlit form can also function as a decoration, like so, where we use the candles as a stem for our plants and bushes, or even as a flower on top of cactus blocks. Just before you place them, remember to use a solid block first, and then you can swap it out for the leaves. Most of us would see a dead bush and think nothing of it, and while they can give sticks every now and then, I think this gives more of a reason to collect these. See, by itself, these don't offer much for looks, but throw in a pot with some leaves or moss above, and now we've got a custom plant perfect for your desk. Defending your base from mobs is an important subject, but luckily this method lets us keep out the monsters without sacrificing our aesthetic. As it turns out, mobs won't walk over berry bushes in their pathfinding, meaning if we tuck some of these underneath our carpet floor, we can use that to both keep mobs in place and keep them out of your base. This is my pet parrot, but it needs a cage, and since it's so small, it doesn't need a whole pen like regular animals, but it can also fly, so the fence isn't that helpful. Enter the scaffolding block. With a single scaffolding like this, it looks like a wooden bird cage, and it has just the right amount of room for a parrot to sit snug inside. And even when they're in the cage, they'll still have plenty of room to dance when you put on the chirp music disc. Despite how it is in game, not every tree has a trunk this size, but since Minecraft's blocks are one size fits all, we'll have to get creative. And for that, walls actually work quite well. Using diorite walls for birch and andesite for acacia, we can make our own skinny trees to use in your world. And while the illusion might break if people get too close, this could do the trick for some landscaping at a distance. Every now and then, Minecraft adds a feature that doesn't make much sense, like the water breathing arrows, for instance. I mean, I don't know how often your friend is drowning, and then the solution is to deal more damage to help them out. But even if they aren't practical, at least on Bedrock, we can chuck a couple of these on a slime block pusher and make ourselves a pretty fountain. This is a melon, and this is a rotten melon. Or it looks like that, because by mixing together mud with our mangrove roots, we get the perfect block to look like a rotten melon. And then if we take after this user and use a wither rose here instead, then that'll also look like the decayed stem from the original melon plant, which could be a perfect way to add some new world building to your new farm, or to play a prank on your friend, whichever one happens first. While Minecraft has its fair share of foodstuffs, the cake is the only one that we can place as a decoration, so for the rest of them, we'll need to get innovative, such as this pork roast made from a stripped birch log. And while it's probably too crispy to make a meal out of it, I think it sells the illusion pretty well, and for a campsite build, that might be all you need. Just for your sake, don't actually use a fire underneath it. If we fill in the gaps of our wall with the brick wall block, then those brick walls make it look as if the wall got damaged and the facade's starting to fade off, which I think is a great touch. Not only does it add literal depth to the build, but it also adds depth in that it tells more of a story with it, which is a lot to accomplish for just a couple of bricks on a wall, so I think this is a pretty good deal. If you've ever made glazed terracotta, then you're well familiar with the different designs these blocks can have, but did you know that they can blend together? Well, sure enough, something like this Reddit user's pattern brings together a number of the different colors into something of expanding ring pattern, and I for one think that's a very cool sight. So while it'll take some time to orient them all the right way around, at least it's a project that'll pay off. Leather helmets don't serve much of a purpose in a Minecraft run, because in the time it takes to get the leather necessary, most of us are already finding iron in the caves. But what they lack in survival, they make up for in creative. Here we can use command blocks to make our own leather helmet animations, which turns this piece of junk into a work of art. Sometimes it's the textures you least expect that work out the best, and I think there's something kind of beautiful about that. Like if you were gonna build out your wooden floor, you'd probably never think to use beehives. But it turns out these buzzing blocks can work surprisingly well for a tile pattern. This escalator doesn't use any redstone, but instead we use looms, because from afar, the lines on the looms start to look like the ridges that you see on escalator steps. And if you add in a command block system like this, we can even make it functional with the teleport command. Have you ever thought about eating redstone? No, me neither. But after seeing it like this, I'm starting to reconsider. See, since vines have a see-through texture, we can mix the texture of the block behind to fashion a proper looking berry vine for our base. And hey, add in some sweet berry bushes by the base and it's even hard to tell the difference. I'll take a wild guess that furnace minecarts aren't used that much in your world, or anyone's world for that matter. And while they can make minecart trains, those don't go too far without breaking. So instead, I'd suggest doing what this user does and using them for an additional texturing in the stone floor. It's a far cry from the intended use, but at least it's something. Instead of using stone or andesite for your build, use both together. And what I mean by that is that if you were to add in patches of stone within your andesite floor like this, it'll create the illusion of broken floor tiles. And then it just looks like the concrete underneath is getting exposed, which I think is a good way to mix together these two blocks, especially considering you're gonna get a lot of both on your next mining trip. Might as well put it to use. If you ask the building community, Minecraft is always in need of more trees. And with 1.17's azalea trees just reusing the oak log, we'll have to look somewhere else to play with a new texture. So how about we leave the caves and instead look to these palm trees? Now, while ancient debris offers up a great texture for these tropical trees, I figured the solution is only worthwhile on creative mode. And even if it looks great, it's definitely not a tree you want to punch. Now, lecterns are not something you need to craft in bulk, but if you happen to misclick in a crafting grid, don't sweat it. Here's the solution. Since these share the same bottom texture as the oak planks, we can make something of a rotated pattern in your roof, which I'll admit is a lot better than leaving these lying in a chest. Now, you might not have seen it, but this block's called the structure block. And I know it has a weird texture, but we'll use that perfectly for our new sound system. After getting this block with the give command, we can stack two together like this on top of an anvil and it'll look like we have ourselves a tower of speakers. So if you have the admin privileges to get the item, it's worth putting in your house as a flex. When building in Minecraft, it's important to stick to your block palette, but above that, it's even more impressive to incorporate different gradients. And as you can see from this example, it can also add a bit of fun to the detail. So if you're looking for a themed way to house your bee farm, then maybe this honey to jungle plank transition is just what your beehives need. With just a wooden shovel, we're gonna make your door look 10 times more realistic. Since by changing the grass that's underneath the door to a grass path, now it'll finally have that small gap underneath that'll make it look like a real door. Because at least in real life, if there's no gap underneath the door, it's not opening that much. So this will fix our ones in Minecraft, all while being insanely simple to do as well. See, while we're all familiar with pistons for moving our blocks, it turns out by placing a couple like so, we can make a pretty convincing pipe setup as well. And while they aren't nearly as functional as something you'll find in Buildcraft, they do add a great detail to your next industrial base. This is not an end portal, but from a distance, it might trick you. And up close, it's still a pretty funny conversation starter to have. By just using the new sculk blocks, we have a texture that matches the void that we see out in the end. So if we line a 3x3 grid with a couple of endstone blocks and Eyes of Ender, you might have the perfect artificial piece to put on display in your next museum. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that most of us don't use structure voids on a daily basis, but it turns out that might be our mistake, because with results like this, that block can clearly be useful for creative building. And I think this example of using rails and structure voids for something of a support beam can be a real help for detail. If you're making an aqueduct or a sewer in your base, then change out the regular cobblestone for mossy cobblestone and seagrass to make it look as if algae and plant bacteria are starting to build up within the rocks, which not only adds a distinction between which blocks are underwater and which aren't, but it also adds some nice world building to your build, all without costing more than a little bit of bone meal to do. It seems like everything these days is getting a whole spectrum of wood types to choose from, all except for ladders. So if that lack of representation is getting you down, then smokers might be a surprising solution. As you'll see, using the backside of smokers, you can give a somewhat spruce-like, kind of industrial texture to your world. And then, even if you add regular ladders on top for functionality, that extra board is going to give a lot more depth than just a ladder on some cobblestone. By using a mix of furnaces that face outward and inward, we can make ourselves a sidewalk and the gutter to put inside, which I think is a really nice touch if you hide the front with a slab. And if you've got plenty of cobble from all the time that you spent down mining, I think this is finally a good use for it. Minecraft has plenty of foodstuffs to go around, but shockingly few can be used for decoration, and I think that's a raw deal. So to solve your stew situation, this composter might be the solution. Now, sure, when it's empty, it doesn't look like much, but fill it up to the brim and put it over a campfire, and now you got a feast fit for the village. From here, this just looks like a smoker, but as soon as we add a lever on top, then it starts to look like an old television set. And granted, we might have to do what this user's suggest and squint really hard to see it, but I think for a set piece in an old living room, this can definitely do the trick. Minecraft doesn't offer up much of its own vehicles, but that doesn't stop the community from building plenty of their own. So if you like building excavators and tanks at your base, maybe add this to the mix. By using blocks with different depths, such as sandstone stairs in a desert biome, we can make vehicle treads for added realism. And now we just need dirt stairs to make this in the rest of the overworld biomes. If you look closely, you'll notice that some Minecraft textures you don't expect to work together do it just perfectly. And such is the case when you put the target block next to the quartz pillar texture, since they both have these evenly spaced lines that blend together nicely. And that could give you some cool opportunities to use these for, not just for a target range, but maybe it's a way to mark a pillar for a secret as well. Or maybe it's graffiti. The choice is up to you. Sometimes the blocks you least expect it can work out the best, and that's definitely the case with this castle gate. Now, never in a million years would I have thought to use lecterns in this way, but after seeing this post, I'm well inclined to believe it's the right choice. And honestly, I think it looks even better than their intended purpose anyway. Mud and wood might not seem like they go together, but like this, they actually do. By just mixing in the new mangrove roots with the mud, we get the muddy mangrove roots that we need for a transition block, and that'll help us to blend in the trees that generate in our mangrove swamp, even better than the ones that spawn naturally. When it comes to lighting up a body of water, the answer isn't always straightforward. Obviously, torches don't gel in that situation, so we'll need to look elsewhere. And if you're looking for something a little less costly than glowstones or sea lanterns, then regular lanterns might be your pick. By throwing these on the underside of a lily pad, we get a really slick way to subtly light up your ponds and lakes. By taking brick stairs and alternating them in a pattern like so, we have it in just a way where it looks like there's a brick missing from each of these steps. And I think that's just perfect. And not only is this a little funny thing to put in your world, but when mixed into a wall like this example, it actually adds some convincing depth. And when you zoom out, it might even leave some people wondering how you actually built it, which I think is true of all the great build hacks. Walls and fences don't naturally connect like this, but if we were to use a debug stick, we can fix that easily. And then, if you're willing to take the time, we get a much cleaner looking pattern. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this does take a lot of time with a debug stick, so clear your afternoon. I'll be the first to admit that paintings do not get a lot of use in my world. And while that's true, I think an implementation like this has a lot more of a reason to exist. By doing this, we go from a bland piece of wall decor decor into a nice piece of world building, and I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. Plus, this is fairly simple to build. All we need to do is push a trapdoor into place with our armor stand, and then add a 1x1 painting to the front. If we mix together the cherry wood with a crimson stem, then when you place them all on top of something like Nylium, you'll notice we have the perfect thing to go together to create a really cool infected tree stem. Though I guess the only issue is that you couldn't build this in the actual nether, since this wood would still burn, but you know, it's a dead tree. I guess that just makes it even deader. Now, scaffolding can be an extremely useful block to use in your build, but useful and looking nice aren't always the same. Though, with just a few of these bamboo trapdoors, we can really take our scaffolding and make it into something that you're okay with leaving up after the build. And plus, it'll still be functional. So even if your friend comes by and kicks out the bottom of the scaffolding, you'll still be safe on top of the actual bamboo. Now, the new seeds that we're able to get from the sniffer, when you plant them down, you notice that they start out looking great, but when they grow up, they look like they're an Avatar reject. Another way to fix this for our Pitchipod is to place it down next to your potatoes, and then place a string over top. So then, no matter how much time or bone meal passes through it, it's never going to grow up to be 2 blocks tall. And now you've got an overgrown potato to mix in with the rest of your patch. Just make sure you don't accidentally break the string while you're harvesting your other potatoes. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?